welcome back to the Backyard Professor Chess videos. I've got a game I want to show you from Jay Watson and Jay Mannion. This is in the World Open from Philadelphia in 1993. I think the thing that struck me about this game the most is the way that the white pieces, Jay Watson was playing white, the way he maintains his power in the center. Now, I know I emphasize this a lot because that's the main emphasis of so many of the grandmasters, if not absolutely every one of them. And it's critical to see the effect of maintaining the center and opening lines through the center. And it's real interesting how Watson does this. He pushes this d-pawn up, which automatically signals to black that he's going to play a cramped game. And so he immediately pushes to make space, right? And then, of course, the pawn is taken. The pawn does not let the pawn go unchallenged. Oh, if I can get that in there. And now white brings up the f3. Now this is an interesting maneuver because by pushing the f3, what white is announcing to black is he is going to maintain the center by bringing up the e pawn eventually to here and controlling the center diagonal. So this is the theme behind the f3. You say, well, that's not necessarily a good move because it stops the knight from coming out here to f3. That is true. However, what it does do is it maintains an occupied center. And that's what white wants to play for in this game. Now, he's going to fianchetto his bishop, and sure enough, e4 comes up, and you can see how he maintains a presence in the center, not just a control from a distance, but an actual presence in the center. And he goes ahead and pushes up to open up the queen bishop because he doesn't want to be too cramped. He wants to open up lines as much as he can for this. And then he comes over here to the knight to the edge of the board, at this point a3. He fianchettos his bishop because he wants the diagonal slicing through the center. You can see the difference in some respects. The idea of occupying the center with your pawns versus the idea of maintaining pressure through the center with your pieces. That's one of the themes of this game that is so interesting. He brings his knight to e2, black castles, and now he pulls the knight over here to c3. So you can see he's beginning to push on the queen side, can't you? He's bringing out his pieces. Both players are bringing out their pieces and developing really well. Bishop comes up here to g5 to put the question to the knight. And the knight comes over here to b6. Knights are the best blockaders of a passed pawn, right? Now this technically is a passed pawn, but he's under pressure enormously. He's going to stop him from advancing forward to maintain that pressure on him at this point. White is bringing out all his pieces, as is black. Bishop comes up to e2, preparing to castle. Finally, the pressure breaks. He takes the pawn there on b5. And now, because he brings up his bishop, you can see that the presence of white on the queen side is beginning to get somewhat strong, isn't it? We have a few, black has a few weaknesses. This square is weak. The aisle, true, is open for the rook, but he never does quite get to make any use of that aisle, of that file, I should say. And now the bishop comes up to d7, because of course he was hitting the rook. It does bring out a piece, and it does challenge part of his queenside play. He ignores that and goes ahead and castles. You can see that through the development, both players are developing, but it appears to me that black is somewhat weaker on the queen side than white is. Black is also somewhat weaker in the center than white is. You can see that. The imbalance here, as Silman would have us note, is there's extra space in the center for the white pieces, and the queen side seems to have more weaknesses on the black than the white does. Now the bishop takes the b5. Bishop takes b5 because there is beginning to get too much power on that queen side, so that makes perfect sense. And then the knight at a takes the bishop. Now you can see he's got the open file, and he does have a little bit of hitting with the knight, and the queen can come up into here or over, but he doesn't seem to be able to use that file nearly as good as he wants to. And now the black knight comes to a4, and the exchange of the knights occur. Black does get to bring his rook up here on this file, but it doesn't amount to a lot for him. White pushes the pawn, and the rook comes back up here to a6. So, queen comes over here to e2. Now white, in a way, it's very interesting how he does this. You notice all this time he has maintained the center. It hasn't opened up so that there's any danger to either player. So they've been more or less playing and exchanging and trying to exploit the weaknesses on the queen side. And now white switches it up in a very interesting way. The queen comes up over here to b6. He just simply pushes his pawn up to maintain that knight there. That's an excellent posted knight to put pressure on the queen side. He closes off the full file for use of black. It's a very, very tough situation. Black doubles up the rooks on the A file, and now white simply pushes his rook to there. Queen drops back to b7, and now white is starting to push on the king side. He had created weaknesses on the queen side because he was able to maintain his center, right? Now that the queen side is basically taken care of, notice what has happened. He has forced black to bring the big guns over onto the queen side. Now white begins to play on the king side because of the way black opened. There is potential weaknesses here on the king side, and white wants to exploit that. The knight drops back to e8, and he continues with his push on the f-pawn, attacking the forward pawn on g6 because he can now break up black's king side. Isn't that interesting how he switches back and forth? All of this is possible. His play on the queen side and his play on the king side, all of this is possible because white has maintained that strong center. It's very interesting to see how this works. The knight to c7. And now f takes the g-pawn. And the h takes the g-pawn. And now we can see that black's king side is going to get shell-shocked. The knight drops back here to a3. The rook comes over to b6 to try to exploit the weaknesses on the queen side. He has to get counterplay over on the queen side because the king side has now been splintered. And white has access to the king side better than black can defend. For instance, white comes up here to f3, coming directly at the f7 pawn. And this pawn at the base of the chain is being attacked. So the king side of black is beginning to get under serious pressure. And he recognizes this by pushing that f-pawn. The bishop comes back to d2. Rook, oh no, this rook goes to b8. And now queen comes up here to g4. You can see that because black has weaknesses, white is going to find targets, right? You look for the targets. And this is the target pawn right here, right directly in front of the king. And he recognizes that, so he pulls the king up to protect that weakness. And now he starts pulling his rook up. Now this is interesting because White's intention now is a full kingside attack. The kingside is weakened enough that he can pull his rook over to here on the H-file and come up into here on the H-file. And now remember, black also has a rook here that he can defend that file with. But with the queen here against this weakness, the rook here on his partially open file hitting there, and the bishop coming through here, it looks like a pretty good kingside attack. Queen pops down to C8. All of his power is over there. Notice that? Because of the way he's manipulated the queenside weaknesses of black, black has had to use pieces to protect these weak squares, and now white can come shifting over here to the king's side. Now the queen's challenging the queen. He doesn't want to exchange queens because as a general rule, the queens are very strong in a kingside attack. If you can, you don't want to exchange your queen, and white certainly doesn't want to exchange his queen here. All he can do is drop his rook down, and now the knight comes up here to C4. He's going to stop the pawns. He's going to maintain his pressure. He's got a weak point here because this pawn is going to potentially fall because of the bishop coming out. You'll see. Anyway, black is cramped and in trouble. That's just all there is to it. Rook finally comes over here to A8. Again, there's not a lot black can do here. And white brings his rook over to E1 on yet another central file. This is critical to recognize. The rook here is hitting the central file. The rook here is hitting the central file. So with this announcement of the central files and the potential to come over here, white is clearly dominating black. Black comes up here to D7 with his queen, and now white goes E5, and it's at this point that black resigned. The maintenance of the center, with the maintenance of the center, white was able to shift between the two wings, utilizing the constant weaknesses that he gave black. So this idea of controlling the center, there's a million ways to do that. That's the other fascinating thing about this. There are a million ways to maintain the center and use the center for your strength. The more ways we see how people do that, I believe, the stronger our chess is going to get. So there's your chessercise. Thanks for watching my videos. Sorry I missed last week. I'll make up for it. In the meantime, happy checkmating, happy chessercising, and I will see you in the next video.